Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video from Gone Legends. In today's video, we'll be highlighting American celebrities who passed away today, and in recent days, along with other notable individuals from around the world. Before we proceed, we kindly ask for your support. If you find these tributes meaningful, please take a moment to like this video. It truly means a lot to us. Thank you for being here. And now, let's begin. 1.
John B. Hammond. John B. Hammond passed away on February 28, 2026, at the age of 83. While the specific cause of his death was not publicly disclosed, the loss marked the quiet closing of one of the most authentic chapters in American blues history. Born on November 13, 1942 in New York City, Hammond grew up surrounded by music, yet he chose not the polished glamour of mainstream fame, but the raw, aching soul of the Delta blues. From a young age, Hammond was captivated by the sound of Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. He immersed himself in the traditions of American roots music, mastering both guitar and harmonica with a devotion that bordered on spiritual. His 1963 debut album introduced audiences to a performer who didn't merely play the blues, he lived them. Across more than 6 decades, he released over 30 albums, each echoing with grit, reverence, and emotional honesty. Though never a chart-topping celebrity, Hammond became a musician's musician. He earned a Grammy Award and the deep respect of peers who understood the purity of his craft. On stage, he stood alone with his guitar, commanding silence through sincerity rather than spectacle. John P. Hammond's legacy is not measured in headlines, but in influence in every blues riff played with feeling, in every voice that dares to sing from the depths of human struggle. His music remains timeless and unfiltered, whispering stories long after the spotlight has dimmed.
2.
Larry D. Kump. Larry D. Kump passed away on February 28, 2026, at the age of 78. The cause of his death was not publicly disclosed, but his passing resonated deeply within the communities he served so faithfully. Born on January 27, 1948, in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, Kump dedicated his life not to celebrity or applause, but to public service rooted in conviction. He eventually made West Virginia his home, where he served as a member of the West Virginia House of Delegates. For years, he stood as a representative of the people, carrying their concerns into legislative chambers with steady determination. Politics for Kump was never about power. It was about principle. He believed governance should reflect the values of everyday citizens, and he carried that belief with unwavering consistency. Known for his thoughtful demeanor and firm stance on issues he held dear, Kump earned both admiration and debate, yet even those who disagreed with him recognized his sincerity. He approached lawmaking as stewardship, a responsibility entrusted to him by the voters who believed in his leadership. Larry Kump's legacy lies in the quiet impact of service. He may not have sought national headlines, but within his district, he was a familiar and steadfast presence. His life reminds us that true leadership often unfolds not in grand gestures, but in years of dedication, commitment, and belief in something larger than oneself.
3.
Lorraine Bailey. Lorraine Bailey passed away peacefully on February 28, 2026, at the age of 89, following a long illness. Her passing marked the end of a luminous era in Australian television and theatre. Born in 1936 in Melbourne, Australia, Bailey grew into one of the country's most beloved actresses. Her presence woven deeply into the cultural fabric of a nation. She first became widely known as a presenter on the cherished children's program Play School, where her warmth and gentle charisma endeared her to families across Australia. But it was her portrayal of Grace Sullivan in the wartime drama The Sullivans that cemented her status as an icon. Through Grace, Bailey embodied resilience, compassion, and strength during a turbulent historical period, captivating audiences with emotional authenticity. Her career spanned decades, including powerful performances in Carson's Law, A Country Practice, and Neighbors. Bailey had the rare ability to make every character feel deeply human, layered with vulnerability and dignity. Off-screen, she was respected for her dedication to the arts and her generosity toward younger performers. Lorraine Bailey's legacy lives on not only in archived episodes and cherished reruns, but in the hearts of viewers who grew up watching her. She was more than an actress. She was a storyteller who gave voice to generations.
4.
Nikolai Kolyada. Nikolai Kolyada passed away in February 2026 at the age of 67. The specific cause of his death was not publicly disclosed, but the theater world felt the tremor of his absence immediately. Born on December 4, 1957, in the Soviet Union, Kolyada became one of Russia's most distinctive playwrights and directors, a bold voice in contemporary theater. Emerging from humble beginnings, Kolyada's early life shaped the realism and emotional intensity that defined his work. His plays often explored the fragility of human relationships, the tension between tradition and modernity, and the quiet desperation hidden within ordinary lives. He founded the Kolyada Theater in Yekaterinburg, transforming it into a creative sanctuary for daring storytelling. His works were staged not only in Russia, but internationally, earning admiration for their raw honesty and poetic grit. Kolyada wrote more than 100 plays, each marked by dark humor, social critique, and deep empathy for flawed characters. Through decades of artistic courage, he nurtured young actors and playwrights, leaving behind a thriving theatrical legacy. Nikolai Kolyada's voice may have fallen silent, but the stages he built and the stories he penned continue to echo, restless, powerful, and profoundly human.
5.
Pepito Rodriguez. Pepito Rodriguez passed away in February 2026, though the cause of his death was not publicly disclosed. His passing marked the quiet farewell of a performer whose work brought pride and identity to his community. Born in the mid-20th century, Rodriguez became known for his contributions to regional entertainment and cultural expression. Throughout his career, he dedicated himself to performance, whether through music, acting, or live appearances that connected him directly to audiences. His style reflected the rhythms and traditions of his homeland, blending heritage with contemporary appeal. He was admired not only for talent, but for authenticity, a quality that made him relatable and beloved. Rodriguez's rise was built on persistence. He worked tirelessly to refine his craft, gradually earning recognition within his country and among diaspora communities abroad. For many, he represented a cultural bridge, someone who carried tradition forward while adapting to changing times. Though he may not have been an international superstar, within his sphere, he was a cherished figure. His performances carried emotion, humor, and heart. Pepito Rodriguez leaves behind memories of applause, melodies, and moments shared under stage lights. His legacy lives on in the cultural pride he helped sustain and the generations inspired by his dedication to artistic expression.
6.
Bobby J. Brown. Bobby J. Brown passed away on February 25, 2026, at the age of 62. The cause of his death was ruled accidental smoke inhalation after a tragic barn fire at his home in Maryland. His sudden passing shocked colleagues and fans alike, bringing a heartbreaking end to a life marked by perseverance, discipline, and authentic storytelling. Born in Washington, D.C. in 1963, Brown's early years were shaped by grit and determination. Before stepping into the world of acting, he was an accomplished amateur boxer, winning multiple Golden Gloves titles. That same resilience later defined his approach to performance: grounded, steady, and unmistakably real. He began acting in the late 1990s and gradually became a recognizable face in television dramas. His most memorable role came as Officer Bobby Brown in HBO's critically acclaimed series The Wire. Across multiple seasons, he portrayed law enforcement with depth and nuance, bringing humanity to a character navigating complex moral terrain. He also appeared in Homicide, Life on the Street, The Corner, Veep, and We Own This City, quietly building a respected body of work. Bobby J. Brown was never driven by celebrity status. He valued craft over spotlight and authenticity over fame. His performances carried lived-in truth, the kind that lingers long after the credits roll. His legacy endures through the powerful stories he helped tell and the integrity he brought to every role.
7.
Vladimir Dovzhik passed away in February 2026 at the age of 57. While the exact cause of death was not publicly disclosed, his passing marked a significant loss for Russian theater and television. Born on May 28, 1968, in Moscow, Dovzhik dedicated his life to dramatic arts, becoming a respected actor and director known for emotional depth and stage presence. He graduated from the prestigious Shuchin Theater School in 1993, an institution renowned for shaping some of Russia's finest performers. From the beginning, Dovzhik approached acting not merely as a profession, but as a calling. He became closely associated with Moscow's Man Theater, where he both performed and directed productions that emphasized character complexity and human vulnerability. Television audiences came to know him through popular series such as Sklifosovsky, where he portrayed a neurosurgeon with compelling sincerity. He also appeared in notable productions including Brigada and Interns, earning admiration for his ability to embody both strength and fragility on screen. Dovzhik's influence extended beyond his own performances. He mentored younger actors and contributed to shaping modern Russian theater culture. His artistry was thoughtful, disciplined, and heartfelt. Though his life ended too soon, the characters he portrayed and the stages he graced continue to carry his presence forward.
8.
Natalia Klimova passed away on February 25, 2026, just 2 days before her 88th birthday. The cause of her death was not publicly disclosed, but her passing marked the farewell of a beloved figure in Russian cinema. Born on February 27, 1938, in Moscow, Klimova became known for her ethereal presence and emotionally rich performances during the golden era of Soviet film. After graduating from the Moscow Art Theater School in the early 1960s, she began appearing in films that showcased her subtle intensity. She gained recognition in productions such as The Hyperboloid of Engineer Garin and Comrade Arseny, where she demonstrated both strength and poetic vulnerability. One of her most enduring roles came in the fairy tale adaptation, The Snow Queen, where her portrayal carried both mystique and emotional depth. Audiences were captivated by her ability to balance elegance with inner complexity. Throughout her career, Klimova remained selective about her roles, valuing artistic integrity over volume. She became a respected figure within Russian cultural circles, admired for her professionalism and quiet dedication. Her legacy lives on in classic films that continue to be revisited by new generations, preserving her timeless presence on screen.
9.
Lauren Chapin passed away on February 24, 2026, at the age of 80 after a 5-year battle with cancer. Her death marked the loss of a cherished figure from the golden age of American television. Born on May 23, 1945, in Los Angeles, California, Chapin rose to fame as a child actress in one of television's most beloved family series. She became widely known for her role as Kathy Kitten Anderson on Father Knows Best, which aired from 1954 to 1960. Her portrayal of the youngest Anderson child charmed audiences nationwide, earning her recognition and awards during her youth. With natural innocence and emotional sincerity, she became a familiar face in American households during the formative years of television. However, life after child stardom brought challenges. Chapin later spoke openly about personal struggles, including addiction and hardship, eventually transforming her experiences into advocacy work. She became involved in ministry and support initiatives aimed at helping others overcome similar difficulties. Lauren Chapin's story was one of resilience. From beloved child star to survivor and mentor, she demonstrated strength beyond the screen. Her legacy remains tied not only to nostalgic television memories, but also to her courage in confronting life's trials with honesty and faith.
10.
William Bradley Pitt was born on December 18, 1963, in Shawnee, Oklahoma, a child who would grow into one of the most recognizable figures in modern cinema. For decades, the world knew him as Brad Pitt, composed, magnetic, seemingly untouchable. His face filled movie screens across continents. His name carried weight in Hollywood boardrooms. To millions, he represented success shaped into human form. But in September 2016, that image began to fracture. After 2 years of marriage and more than a decade together, Angelina Jolie filed for divorce. The announcement did not drift quietly into the news cycle it erupted. Their relationship had long been mythologized, studied, romanticized. They were not just a couple, they were a symbol. And now that symbol was collapsing in real time. Days before the filing, a private family flight became the center of international scrutiny. Allegations surfaced regarding a heated argument involving Pitt and members of his family. The incident was investigated by authorities, including the FBI and Child Services. No criminal charges were filed, and he was ultimately cleared. Yet legal conclusions could not undo the emotional damage. The story had already spread. Headlines traveled faster than facts. For the first time in decades, Brad Pitt was not being discussed for a performance, but for a personal rupture. What followed was a prolonged custody battle complex, deeply personal and painfully public. Court documents replaced premiere photographs, statements were measured and sparse. Silence became strategy. In later interviews, Pitt acknowledged feeling ashamed, exposed, and profoundly shaken. The carefully maintained image of control had cracked. Behind that collapse was another truth he could no longer ignore. Alcohol had woven itself quietly into his life over the years. What began as social ritual had grown into dependency. In the aftermath of the separation, he recognized he was losing grip. He entered therapy. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous. He committed himself to sobriety. He would later describe that period as brutally clarifying, a moment when distraction disappeared and accountability remained. Yet the roots of his struggle did not begin in 2016. Years earlier, in the late 1990s, at the height of his rising superstardom, Pitt had privately wrestled with feelings of emptiness. Films like C7 and Legends of the Fall had propelled him into global fame. He had money, admiration, influence. But internally, he felt disconnected. He questioned the machinery of Hollywood. He spoke about depression, about feeling as though he was watching his life from outside himself. Success did not silence doubt. It amplified it. Fame became a magnifying glass, intensifying insecurities rather than erasing them. The applause was loud, but the quiet moments were heavier. Expectations grew. Privacy shrank. The myth expanded. And beneath it all, pressure accumulated. By the time 2016 arrived, those unresolved tensions converged. The divorce was not an isolated storm. It was the breaking point of years of internal strain meeting public collapse. The armor split open. The persona faltered. For the first time in a very long time, Brad Pitt stood without the shield of image or acclaim. The world saw scandal. He experienced reckoning. But to understand how a man could rise so high, feel so lost, and then be forced into such painful clarity, we have to step away from the headlines. We have to travel back far before the red carpets, before the interviews, before the myth was ever created, back to a quiet town in Missouri. Long before the scandal, before the awards, before the world turned his name into a brand, there was a quiet boy growing up in Springfield, Missouri. William Bradley Pitt was born on December 18, 1963, in Shawnee, Oklahoma. But it was Missouri that shaped him. His father, William Alvin Pitt, owned a modest trucking company. His mother, Jane Etta, worked as a school counselor. Their home was structured, grounded in Midwestern values, faith, discipline, and routine. There were no flashing cameras there, no signs that one day their son would become one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. He grew up in the Southern Baptist household, attending church regularly, surrounded by a strong moral framework. It was a childhood defined by normalcy. He played sports. He joined school debates. He sang in choir. He was active, competitive, curious. Friends described him as charming but thoughtful, confident yet not arrogant. There was a steady energy about him, not loud, not rebellious, but quietly ambitious. Yet even in that structured environment, something restless stirred inside him. Springfield was safe, predictable, comforting. but it was small. The world beyond it called to him in ways he could not yet explain. He would later describe feeling both grateful for his upbringing and eager to break beyond its boundaries. That tension between stability and escape would follow him for years. In high school, he excelled socially and academically. He wasn't the stereotypical brooding artist. He was engaged in student life, participating in athletics like tennis and golf, exploring leadership roles. Acting was not yet the obvious path. Performance, however, was present in subtle ways: storytelling in debates, expression in choir, and awareness of how to command a room. After graduation, he enrolled at the University of Missouri. Choosing to major in journalism with a focus on advertising, it seemed practical, responsible. Perhaps he imagined himself crafting campaigns, building narratives behind the scenes. But during his college years, another realization slowly emerged. He found himself drawn not to selling stories, but to becoming them. In his final semester, just 2 weeks before earning his degree, he made a decision that would redefine his entire life. Without completing his graduation requirements, he packed his belongings into a car and drove west to Los Angeles. He had roughly $325 in his pocket. No agent, no connections, no guarantees. It was not a dramatic departure filled with applause or encouragement. It was uncertain, risky, quietly terrifying. Los Angeles did not welcome him with open arms. It tested him. He took acting classes while working odd jobs to survive. He drove exotic dancers to parties. He dressed as a giant chicken outside a fast food restaurant to attract customers. He moved refrigerators. The glamour people now associate with his name was nowhere to be found. Rejection became routine. Auditions ended in silence. Casting directors overlooked him. He was another hopeful face in a city overflowing with ambition. But something separated him from many others: resilience. He did not collapse under rejection. He adjusted. He learned. He watched carefully. He studied how scenes moved, how actors held silence, how emotion could simmer rather than explode. Television gave him his first small openings. Minor roles in series like Dallas and Growing Pains offered brief appearances, often just a few lines. They were stepping stones, not breakthroughs, but they were proof that he belonged somewhere in the machinery of storytelling. What he did not know then was how drastically his life would change in just a few years. The boy from Missouri who once debated in classrooms and sang in church choirs was inching closer to a moment that would shift everything. But that moment had not arrived yet. At this stage, Brad Pitt was still unknown, still uncertain, still carrying both hope and doubt in equal measure. The storms of 2016 were decades away. The awards were distant, the headlines unimaginable. For now, he was simply a young man trying to find his place in a city that rarely makes space easily. And in that struggle, quiet, gritty, unglamorous, the foundation of everything that followed was being built. By the early 1990s, Brad Pitt had been in Los Angeles long enough to understand one painful truth: talent alone was not enough. Hollywood was unpredictable. It could ignore you for years and then, in a single scene, change your destiny forever. For Pitt, that turning point arrived in 1991 in a film that was never meant to revolve around him. The movie was Thelma and Louise. He was cast in a relatively small role, a charming drifter named J.D., a young man who crosses paths with 2 women on the run. On paper, it was not the kind of role that launches careers. It was brief, supporting, limited in screen time. But when Brad Pitt appeared on screen, something shifted. His confidence was effortless, his smile disarming, his presence magnetic. Audiences didn't just notice him, they remembered him. That performance lasted only minutes. But those minutes echoed loudly. Suddenly, casting directors were calling. Magazines were asking for interviews. The industry began whispering about a new leading man. Overnight, he was labeled a heartthrob. Hollywood, which had once overlooked him, now leaned in closer. But fame, even early fame, can be misleading. After Thelma and Louise, Pitt faced a critical decision. He could accept predictable roles built solely around his looks, or he could search for complexity. The easy path was obvious romantic leads, safe scripts, guaranteed box office appeal. Yet something in him resisted being reduced to surface-level charm. He chose risk. In 1992, he starred in A River Runs Through It, directed by Robert Redford. The film was poetic, reflective, intimate. Pitt portrayed Paul McLean, a gifted but troubled young man navigating family expectations and personal rebellion. The performance revealed layers that audiences hadn't yet seen: vulnerability beneath charisma, recklessness beneath beauty. It was the first clear signal that he was not content to be a passing sensation. Then came Legends of the Fall in 1994. As Tristan Ludlow, he embodied a character both romantic and tragic, wild-hearted, fiercely loyal, and haunted by loss. The film swept across international screens, and Brad Pitt's image became almost mythic. Long hair flowing against the Montana landscape, eyes heavy with sorrow, it was cinematic iconography at its most powerful. He was no longer simply rising. He had arrived. Yet with arrival came pressure. In 1995, he starred in C7 alongside Morgan Freeman and Gwyneth Paltrow. This was a darker territory, a psychological thriller drenched in moral ambiguity. As Detective David Mills, Pitt portrayed anger, frustration, and raw humanity. The film's shocking conclusion left audiences stunned. It proved that he could inhabit complex emotional spaces without relying on charm. Then, in 1999, came Fight Club. If Thelma and Louise had introduced him, Fight Club redefined him. As Tyler Durden, Pitt delivered one of the most iconic performances of his generation. The character was dangerous, philosophical, magnetic, and destructive all at once. The film challenged consumerism, masculinity, identity, themes that resonated deeply with audiences who felt disillusioned at the turn of the millennium. Though controversial upon release, Fight Club evolved into a cult classic, and Tyler Durden became a cultural symbol. By the end of the decade, Brad Pitt was not just famous, he was influential. He had transformed from small-town dreamer to global phenomenon in less than 10 years. But behind the acclaim, something complicated was brewing. With every new success, the spotlight intensified, privacy diminished, expectations multiplied. He had achieved what millions pursue and few attain. Yet, internally, he began questioning whether the summit was as fulfilling as he once imagined. The world saw ascension. He felt pressure building. The breakthrough had opened doors beyond measure, but it had also introduced a new challenge: how to remain authentic in an industry that constantly reshapes identities. As the new millennium approached, Brad Pitt stood at a crossroads. He had proven himself capable of dramatic depth, commercial appeal, and cultural impact. Now he would have to decide what kind of artist and what kind of man he truly wanted to become. As the 2000s began, Brad Pitt was no longer just an actor. He had become an emblem of Hollywood itself, photographed relentlessly, analyzed endlessly, desired globally. Fame had wrapped around him like a second skin, and wherever he walked, cameras followed. Every relationship became public property. Every gesture was dissected. The man who once drove to Los Angeles with a few $100s now lived inside a glass house the entire world could see into. In 2000, he married actress Jennifer Aniston. At the time, she was America's sweetheart from the television phenomenon Friends. Together, they became one of the most celebrated couples in entertainment. Magazine covers declared them the golden pair. Interviews framed them as proof that love could survive the machinery of fame. Their wedding was lavish yet private, guarded carefully from intrusion. For a while, it seemed like stability had found him. But the reality of living under constant scrutiny carries invisible strain. The public projected fantasies onto their marriage expectations neither of them asked for. Every appearance was interpreted as evidence of perfection. Yet inside that narrative, they were still two individuals navigating demanding careers and evolving identities. By 2005, their marriage ended. The separation made global headlines, and speculation filled the silence between official statements. Soon after, Pitt began filming Mr. and Mrs. Smith alongside Angelina Jolie. The chemistry between them was undeniable on screen, and rumors followed off-screen. Whether or not timelines aligned, the public narrative had already formed. Brad Pitt was no longer just a leading man. He was at the center of one of the most talked-about relationship shifts in modern celebrity culture. His partnership with Angelina Jolie became something different from anything he had experienced before. Together, they built a family that crossed borders and cultures, adopting children from Cambodia, Ethiopia, and Vietnam, while also welcoming biological children into their lives. Their household expanded to 6 children. Their bond extended beyond film sets into humanitarian work. They traveled to refugee camps. They advocated for global causes. They presented themselves not just as actors, but as global citizens, yet being elevated to mythic status carries pressure that few can withstand. The world did not see ordinary disagreements or daily fatigue. It saw icons. Expectations were colossal. Every photograph became symbolism. Every absence sparked rumors. Living under that level of observation can distort reality, slowly tightening like an unseen grip. During this period, Pitt continued shaping his artistic legacy. He starred in Ocean's 11 and its sequels, portraying Rusty Ryan with relaxed charisma and subtle humor. He embodied Achilles in Troy, transforming physically to portray the legendary warrior with both strength and internal conflict. In The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, released in 2008, he explored the fragility of time itself, playing a man aging backward through decades of love and loss. The role earned him Academy Award nominations and deepened his credibility as a serious performer. But behind success and expanding family life, internal struggles persisted. He later revealed that even during years that appeared triumphant, he was wrestling with dissatisfaction and emotional confusion. Fame had given him access to everything, yet clarity remained elusive. He began searching for meaning beyond applause. The weight of being watched constantly can alter a person's sense of self. When your identity is reflected back through headlines and speculation, distinguishing truth from projection becomes exhausting. Pitt found himself balancing fatherhood, global advocacy, film production, and the relentless spotlight. Outwardly, he seemed steady. Inwardly, tension accumulated. By the time he married Angelina Jolie in 2014, after nearly a decade together, their union felt like the closing of a long chapter. But only 2 years later, it would fracture in ways neither could fully control. The world would witness another collapse, and this time the consequences would cut deeper than reputation. Because when relationships dissolve quietly, pain remains private, but when they unravel before millions, healing becomes complicated. As the mid-2010s approached, the man who had once seemed untouchable was standing closer to another storm. The mythology of perfection was about to meet reality again. And the next chapter would not be about romance or red carpets. It would be about survival, accountability, and rebuilding from the inside out. By 2016, Brad Pitt had spent more than 2 decades navigating fame, fatherhood, and the relentless machinery of Hollywood. From the outside, his life appeared expansive, a celebrated career, a globally recognized partnership, 6 children, humanitarian efforts, and a production company responsible for some of the most respected films of the era. But behind that carefully constructed image, something was deteriorating quietly. When Angelina Jolie filed for divorce in September 2016, citing irreconcilable differences, the announcement rippled across the globe with seismic force. This was not just another celebrity separation. It was the unraveling of a partnership the media had once branded as untouchable. The news cycle moved quickly, but for Pitt, time slowed into something heavier. Reports soon surfaced of a private family dispute aboard a flight days before the filing. Allegations were investigated by authorities. Though no charges were ultimately brought against him, the situation was deeply personal and painfully public. Custody discussions became legal battles. Silence became strategy. Every development was dissected by commentators who had no access to the private emotional cost. In later interviews, Pitt would describe this period as a turning point. Not because of headlines, but because he was forced to confront himself without distraction. He admitted that alcohol had been a consistent presence in his life for years. Drinking had woven itself into social gatherings, stress relief, and even creative spaces. What once felt manageable had quietly become dependency. After the separation, he entered therapy. He joined Alcoholics Anonymous. He committed to sobriety. He would later reflect that he had lost his privileges, not in a legal sense, but in a personal one. The trust he valued most had fractured. He understood that rebuilding would not happen overnight. The divorce proceedings extended for years, complex and emotionally draining. His relationship with his children became the most sacred and sensitive part of his healing. He spoke carefully in interviews, choosing responsibility over defensiveness. For a man once defined by mystique, vulnerability became his new language. During this period of reflection, he stepped back from the constant spotlight. He immersed himself in sculpture and art. He sought solitude. He examined patterns of behavior he had ignored for too long. Fame could no longer shield him from introspection, and yet, even in collapse, he continued to work. In 2019, 3 years after his most public downfall, Brad Pitt stood on the Academy Awards stage and accepted the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for his role as Cliff Booth in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The performance was layered with humor and quiet melancholy, a stuntman navigating fading glory in an industry obsessed with youth. It was a character who seemed to understand reinvention, endurance, and the cost of loyalty. When he held the golden statue, it was more than professional recognition. It was symbolic. A man who had faced personal unraveling now stood acknowledged by his peers, not for perfection, but for craft. Brad Pitt is alive today. There is no cause of death to recount, no final chapter to close. Instead, his story remains active, evolving. He lives primarily in the United States, continuing his work in film production and acting while maintaining a more measured public presence. His production company, Plan B Entertainment, has left a profound imprint on modern cinema. Films like 12 Years a Slave, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture, Moonlight, which also earned Best Picture honors, and The Big Short reflect his commitment to meaningful storytelling beyond his own performances. Behind the scenes, he has become a supporter of bold narratives that challenge audiences rather than simply entertain them. The road back from 2016 was not glamorous. It was disciplined. It was quiet. It required accountability. He did not reinvent himself overnight. He rebuilt slowly, acknowledging flaws rather than denying them. In many ways, the collapse became a catalyst. The man who once wrestled privately with emptiness in the late 1990s now confronted his struggles directly. The difference was awareness. Fame had once defined him. Now, self-examination reshaped him. His legacy today is layered. He is remembered as the magnetic young drifter in Thelma and Louise, the tragic romantic in Legends of the Fall, the rebellious force of Fight Club, the philosophical soul of Benjamin Button, the composed stuntman of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But he is also remembered as someone who endured public scrutiny, faced personal demons, and chose to rebuild rather than retreat. The storms did not erase his story. They deepened it, and as we continue exploring the life of William Bradley Pitt, born December 18, 1963, we see not a flawless myth, but a human being shaped by ambition, mistakes, triumph, and growth. The next chapter moves beyond collapse and into legacy, not the kind written in headlines, but the kind carved through decades of influence on modern cinema. After the public storm settled into legal documents and private negotiations, Brad Pitt entered a phase of life that felt markedly different from anything that had come before. There were no grand announcements about transformation, no dramatic declarations of a new beginning. Instead, change unfolded quietly, almost invisibly, in the discipline of daily choices. Sobriety became not a headline but a routine. Therapy became not a confession but a commitment. For a man who had lived so much of his life under relentless observation, the most significant evolution happened away from cameras. He began speaking openly, though sparingly, about accountability. He did not blame the industry. He did not blame the industry. He did not blame fame. He spoke about himself, about immaturity, about avoiding discomfort, about learning how to sit with regret instead of escaping it. That honesty surprised many. For decades, he had been perceived as composed, impenetrable, controlled. Now he allowed space for imperfection. During these years, his creative instincts shifted as well. Acting remained important, but producing meaningful work became equally central to his identity. Through Plan B Entertainment, he helped shepherd films that examined race, economics, identity, and history with nuance. 12 years. A slave confronted the brutality of American slavery with unflinching honesty and won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Moonlight told a tender, layered story about identity and masculinity, and also received the industry's highest honor. These projects reflected not just commercial ambition, but artistic conviction. On screen, Pitt gravitated toward roles that felt introspective rather than explosive. In Ad Astra, released in 2019, he portrayed an astronaut traveling to the edges of the solar system while wrestling with unresolved feelings about his father. The film was quiet, meditative, heavy with silence. It mirrored something personal, the journey inward. His performance carried restraint, a controlled vulnerability that resonated differently from his earlier charismatic roles. He no longer seemed driven to dominate screens with intensity. Instead, he allowed stillness to speak. Outside of film, he immersed himself in sculpture and architecture. Creativity expanded beyond scripts and cameras. Art became therapy. Working with his hands grounded him in a way that celebrity never could. The physical act of shaping materials into form provided something tangible, a contrast to the abstract nature of fame. As he entered his late 50s and early 60s, Brad Pitt began to inhabit a different kind of presence in Hollywood. He was no longer the young rebel challenging the system, nor was he the golden romantic figure from the 1990s. He became something steadier, a veteran craftsman, reflective and selective about the stories he chose. Born on December 18, 1963, he now stands as one of the defining figures of late 20th and early 21st century cinema. He lives in the United States, continuing to balance acting, producing, and personal reflection. His story remains unfinished. There is no obituary to narrate, no final curtain call. Instead, there is continuation, a living legacy still unfolding. What makes his journey compelling is not simply the awards or global recognition. It is the arc. The rise from small-town Missouri to international stardom. The emotional turbulence hidden beneath surface perfection. The collapse that forced confrontation. The rebuilding that required humility. Brad Pitt's life reminds us that success does not eliminate struggle. Fame does not guarantee clarity. And reinvention is not always loud. Sometimes it happens quietly, in sober mornings and honest conversations. The world first saw him as an image. Over time, that image evolved into something more complex, a man navigating responsibility, art, fatherhood, and aging in an industry that often fears all three. His legacy is still being written. By the time Brad Pitt entered his sixth decade of life, the entertainment industry itself had transformed dramatically. The era that once produced singular movie stars, faces that alone could command global box office power, had shifted into a landscape dominated by franchises, streaming platforms, and rapid digital consumption. Yet somehow, Pitt remained relevant, not because he chased trends, but because he evolved alongside them without surrendering his individuality. In the 1990s, stardom meant mystique. Interviews were rare. Social media did not exist. Actors could cultivate distance. Brad Pitt embodied that mystique effortlessly. His presence carried both accessibility and enigma. Audiences felt they knew him, yet he remained just out of reach. That balance created fascination. As decades passed and celebrity culture became invasive, that mystique became harder to sustain. Every airport arrival was photographed, every court document analyzed, every aging line on his face commented upon. Many actors from his era faded under that relentless exposure. Pitt, however, adapted. He stepped back strategically. He allowed fewer interviews. He chose projects carefully. Instead of competing with younger stars for dominance, he embraced the role of seasoned figure. His cultural impact extends beyond individual performances. He helped redefine what it meant to transition from heartthrob to respected character actor. In his early career, his appearance often overshadowed his talent. Critics initially dismissed him as simply photogenic, but film after film chipped away at that shallow perception. C7 revealed darkness. 12 Monkeys displayed eccentric unpredictability, earning him a Golden Globe Award and an Academy Award nomination. Fight Club challenged conventional masculinity. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button demanded emotional depth across decades of transformation. By the time he portrayed Cliff Booth in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the industry no longer questioned his range. Winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 2020 was more than recognition for a single role. It symbolized endurance. It affirmed that longevity in Hollywood requires reinvention, humility, and discipline. He stood on that stage not as the golden boy of the 1990s, but as a craftsman who had survived public storms and personal reckoning. His influence also shaped conversations about masculinity in modern cinema. Many of his characters navigated vulnerability beneath strength. Tyler Durden may have embodied chaos, but the narrative ultimately exposed fragility. Benjamin Button confronted mortality and impermanence. Roy McBride and Adra struggled with emotional isolation. These roles reflected shifting ideas about what male protagonists could express on screen. Beyond acting, his production work quietly altered the industry's landscape. Supporting films like The Big Short examined financial corruption with sharp intelligence. 12 Years a Slave demanded that audiences confront painful history. Moonlight offered an intimate portrayal of identity rarely given mainstream visibility. Through these choices, Pitt demonstrated that influence is not only about screen time, it is about platform. Today, Brad Pitt remains alive, actively working and thoughtfully choosing projects that resonate with him personally rather than chasing spectacle. He resides primarily in the United States, maintaining a relatively private personal life compared to earlier decades. Legal matters from his divorce have gradually quieted, though complexities remain. What defines him now is not scandal, but steadiness. His journey illustrates that cultural icons are not static. They are shaped by triumph and misstep alike. The small-town boy who once left Missouri without finishing college became a global figure. The rising star who battled internal emptiness confronted addiction decades later. The public collapse that threatened his image instead became a catalyst for self-examination. Brad Pitt's story is not one of uninterrupted glory. It is one of evolution, of learning in public, of surviving misjudgment and confronting flaws, of understanding that identity cannot be sustained by applause alone. As cinema continues to evolve, so does he. For all the films, the awards, the premieres, and the magazine covers, the most defining role in Brad Pitt's life has never been written in a screenplay. It has been fatherhood, long before the headlines turned harsh in 2016. Before courtrooms and custody negotiations entered his vocabulary, he had already stepped into a responsibility far greater than box office numbers. When he and Angelina Jolie began building their family, it happened with intention. They adopted Maddox from Cambodia in 2002, Zahara from Ethiopia in 2005, and Pax from Vietnam in 2007. They later welcomed 3 biological children, Shiloh in 2006, and twins Knox and Vivienne in 2008. Their household was expansive, multicultural, dynamic. It was not conventional Hollywood parenting. It was global, layered, and deeply visible. For years, photographs captured him carrying toddlers through airports, holding small hands on red carpets, kneeling to speak at eye level. The image of the devoted father became intertwined with his public persona. Yet fatherhood, like fame, is far more complex than any photograph can reveal. After the separation in 2016, that role became the most painful territory of all. Legal negotiations over custody stretched on for years, filled with procedural language that could never capture emotional reality. Reports emerged about strained relationships with some of his children. Public speculation intensified. For Pitt, the distance was not just physical. It was internal. He later acknowledged that rebuilding trust required patience, humility, and time. He spoke carefully in interviews, choosing words that avoided defensiveness. He admitted regret. He acknowledged mistakes. He emphasized growth rather than grievance. In one conversation, he described fatherhood as a profound mirror, one that forces a person to confront parts of themselves they might otherwise avoid. He admitted that he had not always handled pressure well. He expressed a desire to become more present, more accountable, more emotionally available. The vulnerability was striking. For decades, masculinity in Hollywood had often been portrayed through dominance, detachment, or quiet strength. Pitt's later reflections challenged that narrative. He did not present himself as flawless. He presented himself as evolving. That shift resonated beyond celebrity culture. It spoke to the universal struggle of balancing ambition with intimacy, success with presence. In quieter moments, away from public commentary, he turned inward. He described early sobriety as raw and uncomfortable, stripping away numbing habits and confronting memory with clarity. He attended meetings not as a star, but as a participant. In those rooms, status held no value. Honesty did. There is something profoundly human about watching someone once perceived as unreachable step down from the pedestal and admit fallibility. It does not erase harm or complexity. It does not simplify legal disputes, but it adds dimension. Born December 18, 1963, William Bradley Pitt now carries decades of lived experience, not only cinematic milestones, but personal reckonings. He continues to reside primarily in the United States, focusing on creative work and maintaining a lower public profile than in earlier years. His life today feels quieter, more measured. Fatherhood remains central to his identity. Though relationships evolve and distance can complicate bonds, the role itself endures. It is not glamorous. It is not clamorous. It does not come with applause. It demands consistency long after headlines fade. In many ways, the most dramatic transformation in Brad Pitt's life has not occurred on screen. It has occurred in the unseen spaces, in apologies, in listening, in self-examination. Those chapters are not easily narrated. They are lived privately. And perhaps that is fitting, because the man once defined by spectacle now seems to understand the value of stillness. There is a quiet moment that comes for every actor who survives long enough in Hollywood, a moment when the mirror reflects not the rising star, but the passage of time. For Brad Pitt, that moment did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded gradually, almost imperceptibly, through shifting roles, softer features, and deeper lines earned not just by age, but by experience. For decades, he had been labeled one of the most attractive men in the world. That title followed him relentlessly, often overshadowing the depth of his performances. But beauty, in an industry obsessed with youth, is both currency and burden. As he moved into his 50s and then his 60s, the narrative inevitably shifted. The industry that once celebrated his youthful magnetism began offering roles that carried reflection instead of rebellion. Yet instead of resisting that evolution, Pitt leaned into it. In Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, his portrayal of Cliff Booth carried the subtle awareness of a man whose prime might be behind him. The character existed in the margins of fading fame, navigating loyalty and obsolescence in a rapidly changing world. It was a role that required understatement rather than intensity. It required the confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove himself. That performance felt symbolic. Because aging in Hollywood is not simply biological. It is psychological. It forces artists to confront relevance, identity, and legacy. For Pitt, whose career began in the early 1990s, Longevity itself became a statement. He was no longer chasing validation. He had already earned it. The question became not, can he succeed, but what does he want to say now? Films like Ad Astra reflected introspection, the narrative of a son searching for his distant father across the vast emptiness of space echoed something deeply personal. Unresolved relationships, emotional restraint, the human need for connection. The performance was restrained, almost meditative, suggesting an actor comfortable with silence. As he entered his 60s, interviews revealed a man more reflective than reactive. He spoke about time with awareness, about mortality without fear. He acknowledged that every chapter carries its own lessons. There was no denial of aging, no desperate attempt to preserve a past image. Instead, there was acceptance. Brad Pitt remains alive today. There is no cause of death to recount, no final curtain drawn. Instead, there is continuity, a life still unfolding. Born December 18, 1963, he stands as one of the enduring figures of modern cinema, not because he avoided struggle, but because he endured it. Legacy is not built in perfect moments. It is shaped through persistence, reinvention, and accountability. Pitt's body of work spans romance, tragedy, satire, science fiction, psychological drama. His production efforts have elevated voices and stories that may otherwise have struggled for mainstream visibility. His personal life, marked by triumph and turbulence, adds complexity rather than erasing achievement. As time advances, the spotlight inevitably softens. Younger faces rise. Trends evolve. But certain names remain anchored in cultural memory. Brad Pitt's name belongs to that category not as an untouchable myth, but as a human being who navigated extraordinary visibility with imperfect resilience. In the end, aging is not a decline. It is accumulation. It gathers experiences, mistakes, wisdom, and perspective into something richer than youth alone could provide. And for a man who once felt lost in the glare of early fame, there is something profoundly powerful about standing steady in maturity. When we look back at the long arc of Brad Pitt's life, it does not read like a simple rise to fame. It reads like a layered human journey marked by ambition, doubt, love, collapse, reflection, and reinvention. Born William Bradley Pitt on December 18, 1963, in Shawnee, Oklahoma, and raised in Springfield, Missouri, he began as a young man with uncertainty in his pocket and hope in his heart. Today, he stands as one of the defining figures of contemporary cinema, not because his path was flawless, but because it was deeply human. He lives in the United States, still actively working, still shaping stories through both performance and production. There's been no final chapter written, no tragic cause of death to recount. His story continues to evolve, and perhaps that ongoing evolution is the most powerful part of his legacy. His career alone spans more than 3 decades, from the brief but unforgettable appearance in Thelma and Louise that first captured global attention to the emotional gravity of Legends of the Fall, the psychological intensity of C7, the cultural shockwave of Fight Club, and the reflective subtlety of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Pitt has consistently challenged expectations. He moved beyond the limitations of being labeled merely a heartthrob and carved a place among respected actors of his generation. Yet his influence extends beyond his own performances. Through Plan B Entertainment, he helped produce films that confronted painful truths and amplified underrepresented voices. 12 Years a Slave forced audiences to confront the brutal history of slavery. Moonlight offered a tender exploration of identity and vulnerability. The Big Short dissected financial corruption with clarity and urgency. These films were not safe choices. They were intentional ones. His personal life has been equally visible, sometimes inspiring, sometimes turbulent. His marriages to Jennifer Aniston and later Angelina Jolie placed him at the center of global fascination. The expansion of his family across cultures reflected a broader worldview, and the painful divorce proceedings beginning in 2016 forced him into self-examination under relentless public scrutiny. He admitted his struggles with alcohol. He sought sobriety. He embraced therapy. He spoke openly about regret and responsibility. For a figure so long associated with composure, That vulnerability reshaped public perception. It reminded audiences that celebrity does not exempt anyone from consequence or growth. What makes Brad Pitt's legacy enduring is not perfection. It is transformation. He has experienced the euphoria of global adoration and the sting of public criticism. He has portrayed warriors, rebels, lovers, astronauts, and dreamers. He has navigated fatherhood amid complexity. He has aged in an industry that often resists aging. Through it all, he has remained present, adapting rather than retreating. There is something poetic about the fact that one of his most iconic characters, Tyler Durden, once declared that self-improvement was a form of destruction, and yet, in his real life, self-examination became construction, a rebuilding process that required humility. Brad Pitt's life is not a cautionary tale nor a fairy tale. It is a testament to endurance, to the idea that identity can shift without disappearing, to the understanding that fame amplifies flaws as much as it magnifies talent. As he moves forward, the roles may change, the spotlight may soften, but his place in cinematic history is already secured. He is part of the cultural vocabulary of multiple generations. His films continue to be studied, quoted, rewatched, and rediscovered. And perhaps the most powerful truth is this: the story is still being written, not in scandal, not in mythology, but in steady continuation. William Bradley Pitt remains alive not just physically, but creatively, a man shaped by triumph and turbulence alike. A figure who began as a dreamer from Missouri and became a global icon, then learned, painfully and publicly, how to become simply human again. This is not the end of his story. It is the legacy of a living legend still unfolding.